5 days before our wedding, my fiancée came home from her bachelorette party laughing, wrapped her arms around my neck, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Well, I've had all my fun. Now I'm finally ready to be your wife." I smiled like the luckiest idiot alive. I thought she meant she'd grown up, that she'd stopped chasing excitement, stopped wondering if there was someone better out there, and realized that I was the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. If I'd understood those words literally, I'd have canceled the wedding that very night. Instead, I kissed her forehead, carried her upstairs because she'd had enough champagne to mistake our coat rack for me twice, and spent the next hour thinking I'd somehow won the relationship lottery. Funny how optimism can make you look just as stupid as alcohol. People love saying that if a relationship survives 3 years, it's practically bulletproof. Whoever came up with that statistic has obviously never met Linda's friends. My name is Ethan, I'm 33, and until that week, I honestly believed I had everything figured out. Linda and I had been together for 3 years. No dramatic breakups, no cheating scandals. No, we were on a break. Just two adults slowly building a life together. At least that's what I thought. We met at a charity fundraiser. I was there because my company had rented a table. She was there because her coworker had dragged her along with the promise of free wine. To this day, I still think she accepted my number because she confused me with the bartender. Our first date lasted 6 hours. The restaurant closed around us. Then we sat in my car talking until security knocked on the window because apparently parked vehicles aren't supposed to become emotional support centers after midnight. By the end of that night, I already knew one thing. I wanted another date. By the end of the second month, I stopped checking dating apps. By the end of the first year, I couldn't imagine my life without her. She was funny, kind, smart enough to beat me at every trivia game while pretending she wasn't competitive. Spoiler alert, she absolutely was. Every board game in our apartment eventually became a federal investigation. If she lost Monopoly, she'd spend 20 minutes explaining why the dice had clearly developed a personal vendetta. If I won Scrabble, she'd suddenly remember that one obscure dictionary published in 1987 where my word supposedly wasn't valid. I loved every second of it. Well, almost every second. She had one habit that drove me insane. She could never decide where to eat. Ever. Choosing a restaurant with Linda required more strategic planning than invading Normandy. "What do you want?" "I don't know." "Pizza?" "No." "Sushi?" "No." "Mexican?" "Not really." "So, what do you want?" I said I don't know. Somehow, after rejecting 15 suggestions, she'd magically announce exactly what she'd wanted all along. And somehow, it was always the 16th option. Love isn't blind. Love is just willing to sit through 20 minutes of restaurant negotiations. Looking back, those were wonderful problems to have. We got engaged about 9 months before the wedding. Nothing extravagant, no flash mob, no violin orchestra hiding in the bushes. Just me, her favorite overlook by the lake, and a ring that cost enough money to make my bank account file a missing persons report. I was nervous. Not because I thought she'd say no, because I was terrified I'd drop the ring into the water. Imagine explaining that to the jeweler. Yeah, so technically she accepted. The fish just got engaged first. Fortunately, neither happened. She cried. I cried. An elderly couple walking by started clapping. A teenager recorded the whole thing from across the path. I'm probably still somewhere on TikTok with the caption, "Middle-aged guy survives proposing." Life moved fast after that. The venue was booked. The photographer was booked. The florist was booked. The DJ promised he wouldn't play Baby Shark unless specifically requested. I appreciated his professionalism. Every weekend became another wedding task. Cake tasting, invitation designs, guest seating charts, which, by the way, should qualify as psychological warfare. Trying to separate relatives who hated each other while keeping everyone close enough to feel important was like solving a Rubik's Cube that occasionally yelled at you. Linda was amazing through all of it. or so I believed. Whenever I got stressed, she'd laugh and say, "We're going to forget all this planning in a year." She wasn't wrong, just not for the reason either of us expected. 5 days before the ceremony, her bridesmaids organized the bachelorette party. Nothing unusual. I even joked while she was leaving. "Behave yourself," she laughed. "Oh, please, I always do." Those words aged about as well as milk left in a hot car. I spent the evening with pizza, playoff basketball, and exactly 0 responsibilities. It was glorious. Around 1 in the morning, I heard the front door open. Linda walked inside wearing the biggest smile I'd seen in weeks. Her makeup was slightly smudged. She smelled like expensive perfume, champagne, and a nightclub that had absolutely ignored every fire safety regulation. She kicked off her heels halfway down the hallway, missed the shoe rack by 6 feet, called it close enough. Then she spotted me. Her entire face lit up. She practically ran across the room, threw her arms around me, rested her head against my shoulder, and laughed. "You know something?" "What?" She looked up at me with sleepy, sparkling eyes. Then she smiled. That warm, genuine smile I'd fallen in love with 3 years earlier. And she whispered, "Well, I've had all my fun." She kissed me. "Now I'm finally ready to be your wife." I wrapped my arms around her and smiled. At that moment, I honestly believed those were the most beautiful words she'd ever said. The next morning, Linda woke up with the kind of hangover usually reserved for people who had tried to drink their way through international waters. She came downstairs wearing one of my t-shirts, and the expression of someone who had recently lost an argument with gravity. I was making coffee. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and stared at the machine like it was a religious monument. "Is that for me?" "No. I've recently developed a passion for drinking 2 coffees at once." She ignored the sarcasm, took the mug from my hand, and drank half of it before I could warn her it was still hot. Apparently, pain was less important than caffeine. "How bad is it?" I asked. She lowered the cup. "I think my brain is trying to leave my skull." "That sounds serious." "It is. Should I call a priest?" She gave me a weak smile and sat at the kitchen table. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. She complained about the music at the club. She told me Rachel had danced on a table and nearly fallen into a decorative fountain. She said someone had ordered a bottle of champagne that cost more than our monthly electric bill. I listened, laughed, and slid a plate of toast toward her. Nothing in her story sounded unusual. A group of women had gone out, drunk too much, taken too many pictures, and returned home with damaged feet and questionable memories. Civilization continued. I asked her where they had gone. She named a restaurant, then a club downtown. That was it. At least, that was the version she gave me. "So," I said, leaning against the counter, "have you officially finished having all your fun?" She groaned and covered her face. "Did I really say that?" "You did." "Oh God." It was very romantic. I was drunk. That explains why you also thanked the lamp for holding your purse. She laughed, but only for a second. Then she looked down at her coffee. "I just meant that I'm happy," she said. "You know that, right?" "Of course. I mean, I've had my years of being single, going out, figuring out what I want, and now I know." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I want you." There it was again. The beautiful version. The safe version. The version that made me feel chosen. I squeezed her fingers. "I know." And I did know. Or at least I thought I did. That was the strange thing about trust. You didn't feel yourself using it. You didn't wake up every morning and consciously decide not to suspect the person beside you. Trust was silent. It lived in the background, like electricity. You only noticed it when the lights went out. At the time, mine were still glowing brightly, possibly too brightly. The rest of the day disappeared into wedding preparations. We had final confirmations to make with the caterer. My suit needed one last adjustment. Linda had an appointment with the florist because apparently the shade of white selected for the table arrangements was too cold. I didn't know white had a temperature. That assumption cost us another $200. By Monday, our house looked less like a home and more like a command center. Boxes of decorations filled the dining room. Printed schedules covered the refrigerator. Linda's mother called every 90 minutes with a new emergency. The emergencies included one guest becoming vegetarian, another guest no longer being vegetarian, a missing ribbon, a concern about the weather despite the forecast showing clear skies, and the possibility that Linda's aunt might wear a dress dangerously close to ivory. I wanted to ask what the danger was. Would two women wearing light colors create a tear in the fabric of reality? Instead, I said, "We'll handle it." That had become my role. Linda planned. Her mother panicked. I handled it. It was a perfect system for everyone except me. That afternoon, 3 of Linda's bridesmaids came over to help organize the welcome bags for out-of-town guests. Rachel arrived first. Rachel had been Linda's best friend since college and the official architect of the Bachelorette party. She was loud, energetic, and capable of turning any conversation into a story about herself within 45 seconds. If you told Rachel your house was on fire, she'd immediately explain how the smoke reminded her of a restaurant she'd visited in Barcelona. Behind her came Megan and Claire. Megan carried 2 boxes of small candles. Claire carried bottles of water and looked like she hadn't slept. Linda was upstairs talking to the photographer, so I let them in. Rachel hugged me. Almost married. That's what they keep telling me. You nervous? Only about the seating chart. You should be nervous about the dancing. I've already accepted public humiliation. She laughed. Megan smiled. Claire didn't. She stood near the door, gripping the bottles so tightly that the plastic bent beneath her fingers. "Hey, Claire," I said. Her eyes moved toward me for half a second, then away. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah." It was the least convincing "yeah" I had ever heard. She walked past me quickly and placed the water on the dining table. I watched her. Something was off. The way she avoided looking directly at me. The way she seemed relieved when Linda finally came downstairs. At first, I assumed she was hungover. That explanation made sense. They had all been drinking. Maybe Claire had embarrassed herself. Maybe she'd sent a message to an ex. Maybe she'd tried to fight a bathroom attendant. I didn't care. Everyone had moments they preferred to bury beneath several layers of silence and legal confidentiality. I carried one of the boxes into the dining room. The women were already talking about the party, or at least they had been. The second I entered, the conversation stopped, like someone had pulled the power cord. Rachel suddenly became very interested in a roll of ribbon. Megan looked down at her phone. Claire stared at the candles. Linda smiled too quickly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Of course," Linda said. "What were you talking about?" "The wedding." "Interesting. I didn't realize weddings were classified information." Rachel laughed. Nobody else did. I placed the box on the table. "Should I sign something before leaving the room?" "You're ridiculous," Linda said. She walked over and kissed my cheek. I smiled and left them to it. I didn't think much about the silence. Not yet. People always stopped talking when the groom entered a room during wedding week. There were surprises, gifts, speeches. Possibly a coordinated dance number I had specifically asked them not to perform. Any of those explanations made sense. So I went into the kitchen and started checking emails. A few minutes later, I heard voices from the dining room. They were speaking quietly. I wasn't trying to listen. The kitchen and dining room were connected by a wide doorway. Sound traveled. So did secrets, apparently. Claire was speaking. "I just feel like we should tell him." My finger stopped above the keyboard. Rachel answered immediately. "Tell him what?" "You know what? Nothing happened that he needs to know about?" There was a pause. Then Megan said, "Can we not do this here?" Claire lowered her voice. I couldn't hear the next sentence. Then Rachel said something sharper. "It's done. She's getting married. Let it go." Another pause. And then, clearly enough for me to hear every word, Claire said, "I just hope he never finds out." I stood still. The email on my screen suddenly became less interesting. A moment later, I heard footsteps. I moved the cursor and clicked randomly on the laptop. A spreadsheet opened. Perfect. Nothing says innocence like staring seriously at numbers you don't understand. Linda appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame. "What are you doing?" "Checking the final payment for the venue." That part was almost true. She studied me for a second, then smiled. "Everything okay?" I looked at her. For the first time since she'd come home from the Bachelorette party, her words from that night returned to me. "I've had all my fun. Now I'm finally ready to be your wife." I pushed the thought away. "Everything's fine." She came over, kissed me, and rested her chin on my shoulder. Behind her, Claire walked past the kitchen. Our eyes met. Her face lost what little color it had left. Then she looked away. That was the moment a tiny crack appeared in my certainty. Not enough to break anything, just enough to let a little cold air through. The bridesmaids stayed for another hour. Claire barely spoke. When they finally left, Rachel hugged Linda and whispered something into her ear. Megan waved at me from the driveway. Claire walked straight to her car. No goodbye, no eye contact, nothing. I closed the door. "Is Claire okay?" I asked. Linda's back was turned to me as she gathered empty glasses from the table. "She drank too much Saturday." "She seems nervous." "She's embarrassed." "About what?" Linda shrugged. "She made out with some guy at the club." I laughed. "She's single." "I know." "So why is she embarrassed?" "She gets weird about these things." That answer sat between us for a moment. It wasn't impossible. It just didn't feel complete. Like a door that looked closed but hadn't clicked into place. Linda picked up the glasses. "Why are you asking so many questions?" I asked too. "It feels like more." I smiled. "Maybe you're still hungover. Maybe you're annoying. That's not new." She rolled her eyes, kissed me again, and carried the glasses to the kitchen. The tension disappeared. Or at least pretended to. That night, we went to bed early. Linda fell asleep within minutes. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling. I told myself I was being ridiculous. They had been discussing Claire. Claire had kissed someone. Claire was embarrassed. Rachel didn't want wedding week drama. That was all. Simple, logical, comforting. I repeated the explanation until it almost sounded true. The next afternoon, while I was leaving the tailor, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. At first, I assumed it was another wedding vendor. Possibly the florist calling to inform me that White now had an emotional spectrum. I opened the message. It contained only 2 sentences. "Are you sure you want to marry her?" Ask what she really meant when she said she'd had all her fun. I stopped walking. People moved around me on the sidewalk. Cars passed. Somewhere behind me, a delivery truck honked. For a few seconds, all I could see were those words. Then I read them again, and again. The message didn't mention Linda's name. It didn't mention the Bachelorette party. It didn't explain anything. But whoever had sent it knew exactly what she had said to me that night. Words she had spoken inside our house, with no one else there. I typed, "Who is this?" The message showed as delivered. No answer. I tried calling. The line rang once, then disconnected. I called again. This time it went directly to voicemail. I stood there holding my phone, feeling the first real drop of suspicion settle into my stomach. My first instinct was still to dismiss it. A prank. One of my friends being stupid. Someone trying to scare me before the wedding. That explanation was so much easier, so I grabbed it with both hands. Unfortunately, easy explanations have a habit of falling apart when you look at them too closely. Because my friends didn't know the exact phrase Linda had used. I hadn't told anyone, and the women who did know had gone silent when I entered the room. One of them had refused to look me in the eye, and another had said, "I just hope he never finds out." For the first time, Linda's romantic confession no longer sounded romantic. It sounded like a warning I had been too happy to understand. I spent the entire drive home trying to convince myself the message was a prank. It wasn't easy. Once suspicion gets inside your head, it doesn't sit quietly. It starts opening drawers, checking dates, and replaying every conversation you thought you understood. By the time I reached the house, I had invented half a dozen innocent explanations. Maybe one of my friends was trying to scare me before the wedding. Maybe Rachel thought this was funny. Maybe someone had overheard Linda's words and decided to cause trouble. When I walked inside, Linda was sitting on the living room floor, sorting wedding programs into neat piles. She looked completely normal, gray sweatpants, hair tied back, a pen between her teeth. Apparently betrayal, if there had been one, didn't prevent a person from checking punctuation. "How was the fitting?" she asked. "The suit still fits. The wedding can proceed." "Thank God, I was worried we'd have to replace you." She smiled. For a moment, I wanted to show her the message immediately. Instead, I sat beside her. I had no proof. Just an anonymous warning, Claire's strange behavior, and part of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. If I accused Linda and I was wrong, I'd destroy our wedding over a stupid prank. If I accused her and I was right, I'd give her time to delete everything. So I kept quiet. That evening, I wrote down every strange detail. Linda's phrase, Claire avoiding my eyes. The bridesmaids going silent when I entered the room. Claire saying she hoped I would never find out. The unknown message. On paper, it looked worse. The next day, I met my best man, Mark, and our friend Daniel at a bar. I showed them the text. Mark read it twice. Could be a prank. That was my first thought. What was your second? That I'm 4 days away from marrying someone who may have turned her bachelorette party into a classified military operation. Daniel didn't laugh. He kept staring at the screen. I noticed. What? Nothing. Daniel, I'm getting married this week. I don't have time for dramatic pauses. He put down his beer. After our bachelor night, I heard something. Mark turned toward him. What kind of something? One of the guys at the bar knew a security guard at the Grand Regent Hotel. He mentioned a bachelorette party there Saturday night. Linda had never mentioned a hotel. According to her, they had eaten at a restaurant and gone dancing at a club. That could have been any party, I said. I thought so too, Daniel replied, until he mentioned Rachel. My stomach tightened. What did he say about her? She rented an expensive suite. For what? Daniel hesitated. Apparently some men came up later. How many? 3. Entertainers? I don't know. Friends? I don't think so. Then what do you know? He looked uncomfortable. The guy said Rachel hired them. For several seconds, none of us spoke. Mark finally leaned forward. That still doesn't mean Linda did anything. He was right. Men could have been hired to dance. Linda could have stayed away from them. She could have left early. There were still plenty of innocent possibilities. My brain grabbed each one like a drowning man grabbing floating debris. Can we speak to the security guard? I asked. Daniel checked his phone. He's working tonight. 20 minutes later, we were on our way to the hotel. The Grand Regent was the kind of place where even the chairs looked more successful than I was. Marble floors, soft music, staff who could probably smell unpaid credit cards. The security guard met us near a quiet hallway. His name was Noah. He was around 40, with tired eyes, and the expression of a man who had seen rich people do strange things in expensive rooms. Daniel showed him a picture of Rachel. You saw her here Saturday? Noah nodded. She checked into the suite. I opened a photograph of Linda on my phone. Was she with them? He looked at the screen, then at me. Yes. That single word removed the last comfortable explanation. What happened upstairs? I asked. I'm not discussing guest records. I'm not asking for records. I'm asking whether my fiancée was in that room. She was. With the men? Noah glanced down the hallway before answering. 3 men arrived shortly. Did they work for the hotel? No. My hands went cold. Did Linda leave with the other women? I saw her near the elevator later. Alone? He paused. No. Who was with her? One of the men. Mark shifted beside me. Were they doing anything? He asked. Not in the hallway. A wonderfully precise answer. Technically reassuring in the same way, the damage is mostly internal, might be reassuring. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Linda. She had sent me a photo of the completed wedding programs. Your future wife deserves a medal. I stared at those words while standing inside the hotel where my future wife had spent part of her last free night with a stranger. Can I see the security footage? I asked. Noah shook his head. I'd lose my job. I'm supposed to marry her in 4 days. I understand, but I can't give you the recordings. He started to leave, then stopped. One of the bridesmaids came downstairs that night. Which one? Dark hair? Green dress? Claire. What did she want? She asked whether the cameras covered the elevators. Why? She wanted to know what had been recorded. That explained why Claire couldn't look at me. She wasn't embarrassed because she had kissed some random man. She was terrified that evidence existed. Noah reached into his pocket and handed me a black business card. A first name and a phone number were printed in silver. Ryan. One of the men left this at the front desk, he said. I looked at the card. No company name, no profession. Just the contact information of a man who had spent several hours in a hotel suite with my fiancée. Mark looked at me. You're not calling him tonight, are you? I took out my phone. Of course not. Mark relaxed. I'm calling him right now. Ryan answered on the third ring. Hello? I looked at Mark and Daniel before speaking. Did you attend a bachelorette party at the Grand Regent last Saturday? Silence. Then he asked, Who's this? My name is Ethan. Another pause. I'm the groom. The line went completely quiet. For several seconds, all I could hear was his breathing. Then he sighed. So, you were there? Yes, with my fiancée. I guess I can't know for sure. My stomach dropped. What happened? I'm not discussing people I meet. I'm supposed to marry her in 4 days. She talked about the wedding. My grip tightened around the phone. Answer one question. He stayed silent. Did anything happen between you two? Another long pause. Finally, he said, You're asking the wrong person. What does that mean? If she tells you the truth, you'll have your answer. Then he hung up. I called again. Straight to voicemail. Mark rubbed his face. Well, that was terrible. No, I said quietly. That was worse. On the drive home, I kept replaying his words. She talked about the wedding, so she hadn't forgotten about me. She hadn't been drunk enough to forget she was getting married. She knew exactly who she was, exactly where she was, exactly what she was doing. When I got home, Linda was watching TV. She smiled. You're late. Sorry, we lost track of time. She muted the television. Everything okay? I looked at her for a moment. I could ask. I almost did. Instead, I remembered Ryan's answer. You're asking the wrong person. If there was a truth to hear, it had to come from her. Can I ask you something? Sure. What exactly did you mean when you told me you'd had all your fun? She smiled immediately, exactly like she had over coffee. I told you. I just meant I was done with the single life. You're the man I want. I've experienced everything I wanted to experience, and now I want to spend my life with you. The answer came too quickly. Not a second of thinking, almost as if she'd already rehearsed it. I nodded. That makes sense. She kissed my cheek. I love you. I love you too. It was the first lie I'd told her in 3 years. That night I barely slept. By morning I had made my decision. I wasn't going to accuse her. Not yet. If she was lying, I wanted proof. Real proof. Not anonymous texts, not rumors, not guesses. I wanted something she couldn't explain away. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. It wasn't a text. It was a photo. Then another. Then a third. I opened the first one. The Grand Regent Suite. Rachel was clearly visible. Several bridesmaids were holding champagne. Linda stood in the middle, laughing. Nothing unusual. The second photo. 3 well-dressed men had joined the group. Still, nothing undeniable. My heart kept beating. I opened the third. This time my blood ran cold. Linda was kissing one of the men, not on the cheek, not as a joke, a real kiss. Long enough that nobody in the room looked surprised. Below the photos was one sentence. If you still don't believe me, there are videos. I stared at the photos for several minutes. My first instinct was denial. Photos could be misleading. Angles lied. Moments could be taken out of context. Then my phone buzzed again. A video. I pressed play. The suite was full of music, champagne, and cheering. Rachel raised a glass. One last night of freedom. Everyone laughed. One of the women shouted, "After tonight, you're officially a wife." Another voice added, "Come on, Linda. Last chance. Soon you'll be the perfect wife." Linda shook her head. "No, I shouldn't." For 1 second, I actually felt relief. Then Rachel handed her another drink. Someone else laughed. Nobody will ever know. A few seconds later, Linda smiled. "Fine." The room exploded with cheers. The video ended. A second video arrived. It showed Linda dancing with one of the men, then kissing him, then walking with him toward another room. The recording stopped before the door closed. I didn't need to see more. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "You've seen enough?" the man asked. "Who are you?" "Someone who thought you deserved the truth." "Why?" "My girlfriend was one of the bridesmaids." "Claire?" "I won't tell you anything else." "Why send this to me now?" "Because she wanted to tell you." But Rachel convinced everyone to stay quiet. The call ended. I sat in my car for nearly an hour. I just felt empty. The woman I was supposed to marry in 3 days had gone home afterward, hugged me, looked me in the eyes, and told me she'd had all her fun. Now I finally understood what she'd meant. She wasn't talking about growing up. She was talking about finishing her single life, literally. That evening, I transferred every photo and every video onto my laptop, then onto a flash drive, then into cloud storage. If this ended the way I thought it would, I wasn't giving anyone the chance to delete the truth. The next morning, I called the wedding venue. "I need one small change." "What kind of change?" "The ceremony is canceled." The manager was silent. "The reception? Keep it. We're still expecting over 100 guests. They'll be arriving." There was another pause. "What should we tell them?" "I'll tell them myself." The morning of the wedding, Linda looked happier than I'd ever seen her. She kissed me before leaving for the salon. "I'll see you at the altar." I smiled. "See you there." That was the last promise I ever made to her. I arrived at the venue an hour early. Guests began filling the hall. My parents, her parents, friends, co-workers. Everyone was smiling. Everyone thought they were about to witness a wedding. Instead, they were about to watch one end. Linda's father walked over. "Nervous?" "A little," he laughed. "That's normal." If only he knew. A few minutes later, someone rushed over. "The bride is here." The music was about to start. I walked to the front of the room. The officiant smiled at me. "Ready?" "No." Before he could react, I turned toward the guests. "Thank you all for coming." The room became quiet. "I'm sorry, but there won't be a wedding today." People looked at each other in confusion. Linda's mother stood up. "What are you talking about?" I took a slow breath. "I found out what happened at the Bachelorette party." The room exploded with whispers. At that moment, the doors opened. Linda walked in wearing her wedding dress. She froze. "Ethan, what are you doing?" "I'm telling everyone the truth." She hurried toward me. Can we please talk privately? No. Her face turned pale. I know about the hotel. Silence. I know about the 3 men. She stopped walking. I know what you meant when you told me you'd had all your fun. She looked around the room, then back at me. It's not what you think. I took out my phone. I have photos. Her eyes widened. I have videos. She started shaking her head. Ethan, please. I looked at everyone in the room. The wedding is canceled. Linda grabbed my arm. It was one mistake. I gently pulled away. It meant nothing. You came home, I said quietly, looked me in the eyes, hugged me, and turned it into a beautiful lie. Tears rolled down her face. I was drunk. You still remembered you were getting married? It was the last time. Exactly. She began crying. It didn't change how I feel about you. It changed everything about how I feel about you. Rachel suddenly stood up. It was just a bachelorette party. I looked at her. No, it was the end of my relationship. Without another word, I took off my wedding ring, placed it on the table beside the bouquet, and walked out of the venue. No shouting, no revenge, no second chances. Just the sound of 100 stunned guests behind me, and the quiet realization that the wedding had ended before it ever began. For the first week, Linda called me constantly. Then came the texts. Please let me explain. It meant nothing. I love you. Don't let one mistake destroy 3 years. I never replied. A few days later, I learned what happened after I left the venue. Her parents were devastated. Mine stood by my decision. Most of our mutual friends disappeared from her life once they found out why the wedding had been canceled. Rachel tried to defend her. It was just one crazy night. That argument didn't work very well outside their friend group. The wedding venue kept part of the deposit. The honeymoon was canceled, the dress was returned. 3 years of planning disappeared in a single morning. About a month later, Linda asked to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She looked exhausted. She'd lost weight. The confidence she always carried was gone. She sat across from me and cried before saying a single word. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know. I'd do anything to take it back. I believe you. It was stupid. Yes. It was the worst decision of my life. I know. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Can we start over? I smiled sadly. No. Why not? Because every time I'd look at you, I paused. I'd hear the same sentence. She closed her eyes. I've had all my fun. I nodded. Back then, I thought it was the most romantic thing you'd ever said. I stood up. Now I know it was the most honest. I left without looking back. Sometimes people ask me whether I regret canceling the wedding. My answer is always the same. No. Because the worst part wasn't that she cheated. The worst part was that she came home afterward, wrapped her arms around me, looked me straight in the eyes, and turned the truth into a beautiful lie. If I had understood what she meant that night, I would have canceled the wedding 5 days earlier. Instead, I canceled the marriage, and that decision saved the rest of my life. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.